I've been getting into reading more, and I recently just finished a book called The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So I've been thinking a lot about the world, as a young man does nowadays, and I've been trying to read more, and this is the third book I've read this year. I've also read Atomic Habits, which was good, and then I read Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. And so The Picture of Dorian Gray, it has a lot of parallels to today's world. I thought it was interesting that this book was written in like 1890, right around then, so like well over 100 years ago. And it seemed a little bit applicable to today in 2026, which is absolutely crazy considering that in this book they're talking about like driving carriages around and riding horses and stuff. Like they didn't even have cars, which is wild. Basically, the book kind of touches on themes of like pleasure versus fulfillment. And I think that correlates to our world a ton. I see a lot of people using like alcohol and porn. Porn will mess you up, dude. I'll have to do a video on that. And just things that give you instant pleasure but don't lead to a fulfilling life. And so that was like kind of the main theme of the book. And it follows this character named Dorian Gray, and he's got a couple friends. He's got a friend named like Basil that paints a picture of Dorian, and then he's got another friend named Lord Henry Wotton. And I won't spoil the book. I won't go into it too much, but those are basically your three characters. You need to like for a quick rundown. You need to know who Dorian is, who Basil is, and who Lord Henry is. Anyway, Basil, he paints a picture of Dorian, and it's super super pretty and handsome. Basically, Dorian's like a super good looking guy. And Dorian, he starts to get sad. He goes, wow, like this is such a shame that this picture is so beautiful of me and I'm going to age and I'm going to get older. And he makes a wish and he's like, you know what? I wish that I can always look as good as the picture will, and like the picture will age. And somehow this ends up happening, and Dorian receives his wish. And then he has influences from his friend named Henry, who basically kind of talks about how life is about, let's see what I wrote down here. Life is about pleasure and experiences rather than morality. And what's interesting to me is how this one idea affects Dorian Gray's whole life and ultimately leads to the rotting of his soul and his conscience. And there's also a part in the book where Henry gives Dorian another book. They don't say the title of this, but it's like a yellow book, I believe. And the book that's referenced that is a big influence on Dorian's life basically is a story of this guy who just lives a life of hedonism and pleasure and doesn't actually try to better himself. And so you could relate that, and it's highly inferred that it's like casual sexual experiences, abusing alcohol, abusing substances, opioids are mentioned at one point, all this crazy stuff. And I think that's applicable into today's life. I think there's a lot of people, I don't even want to talk about other people so much. I need to talk about myself and like what I'm trying to do. Although this does relate to the broader society as a whole, I suppose. But indulging in substances and casual sex is going to ultimately degrade your soul and degrade the society as a whole and harm people in the long run. What's interesting is Dorian, he doesn't start out as a bad person. He starts out as just a happy-go-lucky guy who's very, very good-looking and very charming and able to connect with people and influence people. And he doesn't start out as a bad person, but his fall doesn't happen overnight, but it takes place because of a couple ideas that were implanted in his head that then change his mindset, that then ultimately change his actions. And I won't spoil everything, but there's a scene kind of near the beginning that he lives through a very tragic experience, and instead of feeling sorrow or feeling bad about what he's just witnessed and what he's gone through and the negative influence he's had on somebody else's life, he ends up taking an aesthetic approach. Instead of viewing it as something to feel empathetic toward, he ends up seeing it as a beautiful thing, that's just life. Which there's something to be said about not being stunted and be able to move on from experiences. But the way he views it, I feel, is unhealthy. And instead of feeling bad and caring about other individuals, he just views it really, there's no right from wrong, but it's just everything's an experience for pleasure. So that's interesting. And so yeah, you don't become something overnight. You become what you consume. Because kind of what I took away from this. And so ultimately, this picture from the beginning, because this is aging and Dorian is not. Not only is it aging, but it's also taking on the weight of these destructive actions. And so near the end of the book, Dorian Gray goes and he looks at this picture again, and it's totally rotted. His soul is just, it's been tarnished, and there's really no redeeming it. And he tries to do some actions near the end, but when he checks the picture, it didn't change anything. And so it shows that he was just doing these actions not because he was actually a good person and wanted to be better, but simply because he was just trying to do like a last second cover up and fix. And it shows how years and years of degeneracy and debauchery ultimately ruin his life. And it's a tragedy. And so I do feel like it's a cautionary tale for today's world and to anybody. I'm very impressed that this book was written so long ago. I've read throughout my life here and there, but recently I've been getting more into it, like I've said. And I think reading is a good way to sharpen your mind, to increase your vocabulary, to become more articulate, and also just I'm fascinated by these stories that you can relate and you can see yourself in the characters and you can learn lessons from them. I like self-help stuff, but I also enjoy stories that play on these themes of faith and love and morality and psychology, all that sort of thing. But yeah, like I said, I think it's a cautionary tale. And this isn't to get up on my high horse, like people need to make mistakes. But I do think when you're young, choosing to consume good content like books and movies is going to help you combat some of the degeneracy of social media, of porn, of all this sort of thing. And so just be very, very careful. And if you're a young man like me, I think you got to navigate the world with caution. You need to try to protect your mind so it doesn't become rotted away. People, like, literally, brain rot is a term that people use all the time. And you don't want to be brain rotted, man. You want to be able to be coherent, to be intelligent. And so reading, I think, is a good thing. I would encourage you guys to read. The Picture of Dorian Gray is a really, really easy book, too. It's only like 150 pages. So if you haven't read in a while, you can check that one out. Interesting themes. It's not too hard of a book. I saw somebody online recommend it. That's why I found it. So that's some takeaways. And I think with my generation, things are getting pretty crazy nowadays, and I feel like there's a lot of hopelessness, you know? You want to keep on living, and you want to live a good life. And some people make the case that it's too far gone, that why even try? And I get not wanting to try when things get so bad and it feels like there's no hope. And I think it's more important now than ever to have brotherhood and to have friends and to have connection and to have family, because ultimately that's all you really have. Isolation is going to be very, very bad. If you are in a period of isolation, new city or whatever, consume books, consume movies, consume media that is more like art rather than just like AI slop stuff that's just going to take your attention and not give you anything. Also try to produce. So write in a journal, even if it's like one sentence, you're at least producing something onto a page rather than just consuming media all the time. We live in a very, very interesting time, but I'm shocked that a book from the 1890s is still relatable to today. So definitely a good book. There's a lot of benefits to it. And let me know what you guys think of this book. If you have any other recommendations, let me know, and we'll see you in the next one.